Hello, I'm Mischievous Marcinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy 15, and all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which I say do not count, despite the fact that I am just, flush with comics in this humble abode here, Dan.
Yeah, Mark, I actually I'm about to cross 4,000 Spider-Man comics in my house. And
Okay.
I don't know what to think of that number. I don't know if that's a proud moment or a sad moment. But that CLZ app makes it apparent every time I log a new book in there, that we're approaching that 4,000 number.
My goodness. Is
Yeah,
that going to
well,
be is that the new competition? Because I don't think I have that many in this house, Dan.
oh, I know that's not a competition, Mark. That is a cry for help.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, and if you don't know, I am Dapper Dan Gavoston. I'm drowning in comics, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including those same Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which I say definitely count, whether or not you consider Planet of the Symbiotes one of them. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 will remain a fantasy, I think, for probably much of my life. Is that fair, Mark?
I have no comeback, no witty comeback. I mean, we'll see. I mean, maybe you'll get a sugar daddy, Dan. I don't know.
Who knows? Well, welcome everybody to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show.
This podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep our podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com, and there's a big button that says Patreon, and you know what to do. You click on that button, and then you join the Patreon. It's that simple. But today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 41, part of the Gang War Epic. This issue was written by Zeb Wells. The cover and interior artwork is by John Romita Jr., inks by Scott Hanna, colors by Marcio Menyz, and of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramanga. This issue was first released on January 3rd, 2024. Mark, why don't you hit us with the recap of this issue?
Thank you, Dan. We open with a WWE-style stare-down between Spidey, She-Hulk, Tombstone, Kingpin, Typhoid Mary, and some goons. Kingpin seems a little miffed that his son has been drawn into the gang war for the reasons of revenge, and in this case, revenge means going after Tombstone's family. Meanwhile, Typhoid Mary is waving and blowing kisses at Spidey and She-Hulk, and they are fighting over who she's making eyes at. Fisk ups the temperature a bit in the room by telling Lonnie that he sent some troops to help Rose in his war against Janice. Tombstone tells him to call off his men, and Fisk is all, I know you are, but what am I? And then a big melee starts. That brings us over to another stare down. Gimp Janice and the Syndicate are staring down Rose and Digger, and Beetle disrespects Digger by calling him poor man's Bruce Banner. Just as Digger is about to start cracking skulls, we zoom back over to Fisk and Lonnie, and man, that's a lot of nose-to-nose contact for two mafiosos. Tombstone's capped teeth crack, revealing his terrifying pointed teeth and unlocking the rageful Tombstone we know and love. Some random red shirts that Spider-Man and She-Hulk are fighting are on fire, and that's long enough for Typhoid Mary and her adamantium-dipped sword to join the fight. She-Hulk learns pretty quick that her work is cut out for her here, and that brings us back over to Digger and the Syndicate. Digger starts making mincemeat out of the Syndicate, just grabbing some random appendages, while the Rose opens fire on Beetle, only to find out that in addition to being kinky, Janice's new suit is also bulletproof. She cracks Rose on the skull, and that's a loud enough hit to remind us that Madam Mask, Shotgun, and the disembodied head of Silvermane are still out there. Shotgun and Mask start talking strategy about that Janice vs. Rose battle simmering, and Mask has her money on, LOL, Fisk wins, of course. Speaking of which, Kingpin and Tombstone are now biting each other's faces, and boy, there's a lot of blood here. Spider-Man tries to intercede before it gets any worse, and then Kingpin throws him across the room for his trouble. She-Hulk and Mary are still fighting until Mary stabs her in the stomach, a la Wyatt, stabbing legacy Spider-Book character and best friend of Peter, MJ, and everyone else supporting in the Spider-Verse, Kamala Khan. Except this time, someone in the Spider office realized that they have already exceeded their fridging of women in Spider-Man comics quota by one in the past 12 months, so She-Hulk is upgraded to very much alive. Lonnie and Fisk are still fighting headfirst with each other, and just like that, we switch back over to Harlem, where Digger is still tearing apart the Syndicate. However, Janice looks like she's got the Rose on the ropes, until another batch of goons comes in with guns a-blazing. That brings us right back to Wilson and Tombstone, and despite having every bit of his face chewed up, Kingpin is able to hear his phone ring only to announce to the room that the gang war is over.
Wow, Mark, what a recap. A little bit shorter than normal, if only because this is a very visually dominant comic, or at least one that's dominated by fisticuffs and punching and all of that back and forth. I would say, Mark, and tell me if you agree with this, that this is kind of the shit hits the fan issue. Like, Spider-Man has been going into this gang war to kind of exercise some kind of control and tamp it down and solve it. And this is where, Fisk versus Tombstone is probably about as, big of a brouhaha as we're likely to get. Although I'm kind of forgetting that Madame Mask is still off there doing something, and we can get into talking about how maybe that storyline isn't really progressing very strongly with the core story of what's going on here. But to me, this is kind of where we reach the peak of, chaos is ensuing, even though the ending suggests the gang war is over. I don't buy it for a second. This is at least my hope, where Spider-Man has to really step up and step in and say, I am going to be the control agent of this whole thing.
For sure. Well, what I would say as a starting point, yes, I agree wholeheartedly with your characterization there. I am just so excited by the fact that we can say shit hits the fan on this show right now. But beyond that, I feel like in the year 2023, 2024, if I don't know what the conversations between Marvel and Zeb Wells and John Romita Jr. is to get JR to come on these books, but I feel like this had to be the part of the story that Zeb sold JR on to come do this book, or at least do this storyline on this book, because this is I feel like the late era Romita Jr. in full glory here. It's a combination of his old school Daredevil stuff. I mean, even with the Typhoid Mary, but also Kick-Ass, and there's blood all over the place. It's really graphic. This is probably the most graphic Spider-Man story I think we might have ever had. I really struggle to find another, as bloody.
Issue 3 of this run might push back otherwise, but yeah.
Yeah, but not for nothing, that was all within Spider-Man's costume, so it kind of dulls the visual impact of it. I mean, you have two characters literally tearing each other's faces apart in this, it's like two piranhas going at it in this comic. It's pretty gritty and gruesome. It just feels like everything is coming undone. There were several moments in this comic alone where, I either got kind of faked out about the fate of a character. I mean, in some instances, I think we're getting intentionally faked out about fate of characters. And also, frankly, there were other parts where, as I'm reading it and reflecting on it, I'm thinking to myself, this character or that character is not going to make it to the end of the storyline. I think it's something this kind of chaotic and it's like a bomb going off in the middle of a market square, there's shrapnel everywhere right now. It's there is going to be collateral damage that comes out of this comic, even if we haven't physically seen it yet in the pages of this comic. So yeah, it's the big blowout for sure.
Yeah, I don't think you do a gang war if you're not going to have some serious losses in some way. I think we probably both agree on who that's going to be, and I have that discussion tabled for the second half of this episode, so we'll come back to that.
For sure.
idea. But I think you're right. I mean, Zeb said as much, I think, on Twitter that he promised John Romita Jr. that he would get to incorporate Typhoid Mary at some point, and that this was like a payoff on that promise. So I think you're right. Like there's a lot of like, you can see like maybe Shotgun as well being like a favorite that Romita has worked on over the years and wanting to work with them again, and Zeb, finding a way to incorporate that into this. But you're right also in terms of like pure bodies on the page. These are crowded, pages. Maybe not with dialogue, but this is a lot of heavy lifting from Romita Jr. What I wish there was more heavy lifting of in this comic is like Spider-Man's narration and role in the pages of this. We get a little bit inside the head of Spider-Man, almost as like a narrator to open this chapter. But it's not quite what Zeb has been doing in previous chapters of this story. And this is the one where I kind of felt the most like Spider-Man took a back seat. And maybe it's appropriate because the main show is Tombstone versus Kingpin. But it does feel weird that Spider-Man is kind of there. He's doing some fisticuffs and making some quips, and he splits up Tombstone and Kingpin. But there's no big dramatic moments for the character. And this far into the story, I kind of had wished that he had more to do. I suspect that we're about to turn that corner, as I said earlier. But charting my feelings about these comics, this is the point where I kind of started to feel the lack of Spider-Man and begin to worry about, is this a Spider-Man story? As much as I'm enjoying the story, like it cannot be about Spider-Man. These are good comics and a good, like, big event. But if I'm reading Amazing Spider-Man, I'm hoping for more Spider-Man.
Yeah, well, also, I mean, if for no other reason, frankly, than I think like Peter's eye is, if it's not needed, I feel it can elevate this story more so because, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, I mean, there is all this chaos erupting, and like Spider-Man kind of comes into gang war, looking to, it's almost like, the sheriff is back in town to establish order. It's like he's been neglecting, being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man for so long. He's been called out by his colleagues and by Miles for it, and he's trying to make good on it. And he has completely lost the thread in this comic because you got these two kind of immovable forces squaring off here in Tombstone and Kingpin, one of which he had aligned himself to. So like I feel like, as tense and brutal and bloody as this comic is, how much better as Spider-Man comic readers would it be to have like Peter's voice in the background of this whole thing? Like, yes, like you don't want it to be like overkill, but like, we had, like you mentioned, you had that one scene where he kind of tries to break it up and he gets like thrown away onto the side first, like let the grown-ups are talking, which is like kind of, I don't know if it's meant as meta commentary, but like it's kind of like a slap in the face to the Peter monologue, or inner monologue anyway, because it's like, it's almost like the comic itself is saying, you're immaterial here, buddy. What's important are these two behemoths going at it, and it's like no, like Peter's conscience and Peter's responsibility for getting involved in this thing in the first place is what was kind of the promise that drove this story. So not having that here feels notable, and I feel like we need to start dialing that back up again in one way or another, or I think it's going to be a big missed opportunity as much as I'm enjoying these comics.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's specifically the quest that Robbie sends him on, which he says, like, I'm not sure that heroes have a place to play in this city anymore. Like, it's up to you to prove it, Spider-Man. Like, if you want this law overturned, you're going to be the one that has to prove it. And, here the villains are keeping him out of it, right? Like whether forcefully or by, Tombstone exerting his own expertise. And you're right. I mean, maybe it's just as simple as framing. You said framing it as simple as framing it as hearing Spider-Man's worries as chaos breaks out. Like, oh my gosh, like, was it right to align with Tombstone? Is he in control? Like, am I fulfilling my responsibility to Robbie's credo? And we don't get enough of that here, and I'll eat my words if the next issue is all about that. But, this seemed like an appropriate place to bring that back, and I definitely left me wanting. One of the things that did really stand out to me here, and I think kind of click into place, is like thinking about the thematic elements of this story. I don't know if it's because of Kingpin's return and him squaring it up with like, my son is in this, your daughter is in this. But for the entire Zeb Wells run, we've talked about the idea of like moving forward past the sins of the past, whether that be the Green Goblin or Peter having to move on and put Mary Jane behind him because of previous actions and things outside of his control. And that's been so much the kind of thesis of most of these stories. I would say mostly of like the non Ed McGuinness stuff, although I guess the Otto Octavius stuff was dipping into that as well. But here, that kind of takes on the being represented by like generational change across all of these characters, and I think it's across all of the B titles too. And I whether intentional or not, I could imagine a meeting saying, "Hey, we're going to do this event. It's about this. Can you guys all do riffs on this?" Because it does seem like every book is kind of tapping into this. You've got, Peter, he doesn't have kids, but Miles might as well be the generational representative that has been pushing back on Peter and saying like, hey, you should be better. The same with like Janice and Lonnie, the Lincoln family, Kingpin, the Rose. You've got Madame Mask stepping out of the shadows from her father, Count Nefaria. You've got Randy and Robbie. Randy trying to make a big change in the city, and that's been a long-held relationship between Randy and Robbie all the way back to Randy's first appearance, where he, pushed, generational change amongst the African American experience. You've got Shang-Chi and Zhang Zhu in that book. He's kind of rewriting the role of of his father's organization. You've got Elektra carrying on for Matt Murdock. The one that doesn't really fit in is like Jessica and Jerry, but she is looking for her child. I don't know if that's really about any kind of generational change, but at least it's dealing with mothers and sons. And then, you could, if you really wanted to put this in, like Luke Cage's book is all about dealing with the sins of the past too, which is, a law was put into action before he arrived, and now he is like kind of trying to work within the system and outside of the system to change it. And I don't know, that all clicked into place for me with this issue. The idea that like all of these characters are wrestling with what came before them. Did that stand out to you at all, Mark?
Oh, for sure. I mean, like I mean, it certainly comes through here. I mean, I think, frankly, over the history of this book and this character, we have seen these kind of generational stories. I mean, whether it's the Osborns and obviously Uncle Ben and Peter's parents, but like it's not to bring up old gripes with the internet, but like there was a essay I wrote on Chasing Amazing many years ago where I made some kind of comment about like family and generational change being like a core theme of Spider-Man, and someone responded, "That's not the core theme. The core theme is responsibility." I'm like, yes, but it's like we're allowed to have like other riffs on responsibility, and like at the end of the day, like this kind of moving forward of the sins of the past is at its core about responsibility. It's in all these different dynamics. It's what are my obligations? What are my responsibilities to either the generation up or the generation down that are driving these actions? Like Lonnie feels he's got to protect Janice, but Janice feels that she's got this lust for revenge and also for validation right now, and like and these are, like, is that clouding, is that lust clouding her sense of responsibility of doing the right thing? Is she going to get herself into so much trouble that something catastrophic happens to her? Obviously, I mean, I thought the example you gave with Luke Cage and Wilson Fisk is a great one in terms of, like, again, that responsibility. It's like, Cage is taking over, but he can't just be, Luke Cage, hero for hire here as mayor of New York. He has a responsibility to kind of maintain a sense of order, and we're seeing that struggle with him as he's trying to, do the right thing here, but do it, like, if not by the book, at least within, the guardrails that have been put up by the previous administration, if you will. So yeah, I think this is a storyline right now that is taking some themes and notes from Spider-Man's past, but like really like playing with it from multiple angles with multiple characters. I think it's been mostly successful to that point right now. I think like the clarity between the different generations and the conflict between them is very clear. Like, it's not, I don't think there's anything overly muddied or convoluted in terms of these relationships here, and like, keep those dynamics crystal clear and easily defined, and I think it'll end up being successful storytelling instead of muddying it in like some kind of convoluted mythology. And we're not seeing any of that here. It's just like, it's, fathers and sons, fathers and daughters, predecessors and people who succeed them. It's all there. It's easy. Draw the lines. It's great.
There's no secret scrolls in here.
No,
no,
or secret daggers, or like or twins who have cosmetic surgery or anything like that. So we're
not yet, at least.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what could make this a successful, like, Spider-Man story. Across this very wide net that they've cast, that it does seem to be playing with these core thematic ideas. All it just needs now is an injection of Spider-Man. Like, he needs to feel like the driver of this. And so we'll see where that goes. And then the other kind of like dangling thread to me, and I mentioned it earlier, remains the Madame Mask of it all. By the end of this issue, first of all, we find out that Count Nefaria isn't dead. He's just mostly dead. And he's hanging on the wall by some blades. But
although we didn't see mostly dead Hammerhead this issue yet.
Yeah. He's definitely still mostly dead, though, because they made a point to say he wasn't actually dead, which means he's not. It would be very bad at the end of the story if they were like, and Hammerhead quietly bled out in the background of this story. Although that might be enough for Hammerhead to wake up again, see a different poster, and change his personality altogether. I'm a Na'vi now. Anyway, that's a 2023 reference for you all. I guess that movie was 2022. Anyway. That remains to me. I mean, she's got some plans for her father. So, we find out in this issue, so maybe there's something to come there. But like thematically, whether that ties in, it still doesn't tie in plot wise. Like, I don't know. Like, if she truly is the big bad, she's a big bad in another story right now. Yeah. So like, I want to see that stuff coalesce a bit more as well. So, Mark, we're going to get to talking about who we think might be dying by the end of this story and some other things in a minute. But why don't you tell people, if they want to be more a part of our community, where they can go?
Of course, Dan. Well, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and much, much more. We can't encourage you enough to check out the amazing Spider Slack community, especially if you're in the mood for some good old comic book camaraderie, by clicking the link in this podcast description to sign up. But Dan, we're also going to use this segment today to talk about our new amazing Spider Talk Substack. What on earth is a Substack, and what are we doing in it this week?
Yeah, the best way to describe a Slack is to say it's like a Discord, and the best way to describe a Substack, which sounds a lot like Slack, although they're different things, is to say it's like a newsletter. You can get in an app or an email, right? Remember those things that you used to get,
Yeah.
back in the day in the late '90s and early 2000s, and you delete them really quickly. Well, they're all the rage now, and we've got our own Substack, the Amazing Spider Talk Substack, and it's really allowed Mark and I to kind of return to the thing that we kind of bonded over, which is like writing about Spider-Man. Like before there was the podcast, there was Chasing Amazing, and I wasn't really writing about Spider-Man, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But
Well, when you launched AmazingSpiderTalk.com, there were plenty of written reviews, and
it's
you
true.
had quite the little empire there. You had writers. Like, what was that? I wrote everything myself on my damn website. You had a team. What is that nonsense?
Hey, look, I even had you on the team, so
Yeah.
don't make me go back and revoke your non-pay. So there you go. But yeah, it's a regular newsletter, and it's completely free. Like you don't have to spend a dime. Mark and I are putting it out just about every other week, although we might increase it and make it more like substantial and more bite-sized. I mean, we're doing all kinds of stuff. But Mark, what did we do in this week's Substack at the time that we're recording this episode?
Well, we issued our end of the year recap, and it was kind of our state of Spidey, state of the union, if you will. So in that, we talked about the best issues of 2023, some other thematic elements that kind of emerged over the course of the year. Of course, we talked a little bit about Across the Spider-Verse and the Spider-Man 2 video game, which I still have not played because I'm still stuck in 2017 in terms of video gaming. But yeah, I mean, like it is a pretty comprehensive overview of the past year and our thoughts on it, like kind of above and beyond what we already talk about on this show. And it's in beautiful written form, like in the olden days. I mean, you could maybe hold a candle to your computer to read it by with like a pot simmering on the side. I don't know. I'm trying to like conjure something up here, but
Bust out your cathode ray tubes, everybody.
there you go.
Yeah,
There you
yeah,
go.
yeah. No, I think that's a good overview. I mean, like so much Mark and I are kind of like in the moment talking about issue to issue, and every issue we try to provide like, some context for our reviews and where they fall in the world of Spider-Man. But like with this, we got to really look back holistically at 2023, the ups and downs of the whole thing. And I think it's kind of a neat thing to do, and it's been very well received. So anyway, if you want to join us on our Substack journey and get those newsletters, you can just go to amazingspider.substack.com. It'll prompt you to sign up. It's totally free, and you'll start getting a bunch of content, including all of our reviews of all of the B titles that have been spinning out of Gang War. And man, there are a lot of them. So
There's a lot.
that's the Substack and the Slack. They sound identical and are probably going to be confused, but get it straight. That's what we're offering. Mark, let's get back into our review of issue 41, and let's talk about John Romita Jr. I mean, I think we've said a little bit about like how much this is like a showcase book for him. Were there moments that stood out to you from this comic?
I mean, yeah. I mean, this is. I know I was making a comment about it being like kind of very bloody and graphic, and like let's not get it confused here. I wasn't saying that in a bad way. I thought this was great. Like I like this was just like JR dialed up to 11, and he's delivering. I mean, he's having the time of his life here. I mean, whether it's getting to draw Typhoid Mary, if that's just what inspires him and gets him going, I don't know, man. Like I can't speak for JR on that front, but like he is just like dialed in and clicking on all cylinders here. I mean, the fight between Lonnie and Fisk is just so. I again, like I can't think of what to compare it to visually from what we've seen over the years in this comic, and like you're just conveying so much brutality over the course of many panels where it's really just two heads like butting. You know what I mean? Like that was what was so interesting about it. It's like, it kind of looks like two rhinoceros or two, elephants just going at it. Like they're these larger than life characters. Like they just seem, within the panel, just so huge and imposing and frightening and like that they're gonna like, and I know we're still saving the segment for a little later, but like, there's a part of me, that's like almost expecting one to just like issue the kill shot at any point. Like that's how like tense and close everything is. So like,
or like Mike Tyson the ear off of someone.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like, hey, I watched that in real time, Dan, and that actually, I did think of that as I was watching that. I was like, this is like Tyson and Holyfield. This is insane. Like, it's like you. When did you ever see that in a boxing match before? When did you see this in a Spider-Man comic before? It's beyond the pale, but in such a great way because it works given who these two characters are and how it's rendered here. I thought this was phenomenal.
Yeah, this is going to sound like an insanely hyperbolic comparison, and so I'm just going to acknowledge that, like, from the start. But the thing I immediately thought of was Batman versus Superman from The Dark Knight Returns. Like, these kind of hulking, squared-off, like, mounds of muscle that are rigidly, like, decking it to each other. There's that great image of Batman just like slugging Superman across the face, and he kind of forms like a 90-degree angle, the body of Superman, and that's what I thought of here. But for me, the like most impactful moment, and I use that term specifically, is the first clash between the two men as they hurl their bodies at each other, and it's rendered in this amazing spread where literally the fold of the page is where their bodies hit each other. And I just thought that was so cool, especially coming from a guy that did like the kind of vertical page twisting stuff with the Vulture earlier in this run. Like using the physicality of the book to kind of emphasize that clash. It makes me like happy to be reading physical comics in 2023. And I mean, there's many reasons I'm happy to be reading physical comics in 2023. One of which is the shuddering of Comixology, but rest in peace. But that page was so impactful because of that crease down the middle and the way they hit. I thought that was really, really cool. And I know we've had the back and forths of like, are Tombstone's teeth capped or not capped? And I thought that was just a smart play by Zeb and maybe a signal for what's to come of like the mind state that like Tombstone is in, is that like he is getting dirty again.
He's feral, man. He's totally feral. Yeah.
And, if the end of this issue is to be believed, which I don't think it is, like we're about to see an even more feral Tombstone. Maybe it's a play by Fisk to make him more feral and seize on his emotionality towards his daughter. But let's get to talking about. Let's talk about the Lincolns because.
Well, could I back you up on the art one more thing? I did want to ask you. I alluded to it in the recap, but the sequence of Mary's sword going through the gut of She-Hulk, which immediately conjured the visual of Kamala Khan getting it from I mean, like it's almost shot for shot the same exact.
Is, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's like wow, this like is that like the only way they like to like stab people in this comic now? Is that the official stabbing picture or what?
I mean, I got to be honest with you, Mark. When I read that, my heart like sunk, like because I was like, are we gonna have to like? Not only are we going to have to like deal with like, oh no, here's Zeb killing another woman off, like not because I feel any like desire to defend him, because I did not defend the killing of Kamala Khan. But like, I was just like, really, like, don't make me believe in all of the bad stuff that people are saying on the internet, which I like, not that I'm trying to push back on them, because I just genuinely disagree that like this book has been targeted in any way. But
Right.
like, oh, doing that would have really upset me. But then the next panel is like, I'm just going to heal right back up again. And I'm like, oh, yeah, of course, duh. A sword
Right.
wouldn't
It's
take
a
out
Hulk.
She-Hulk. Yeah, it's a Hulk. Yeah.
No, but it was a very quick fake out for me. But yeah, like it was a very. I mean, yes, the scene itself kind of establishes it was a fake out. But like I was just like, no way. But like I did like the. I have to imagine. I mean, don't get me wrong. The visual stylings of how they frame that in both instances is very artistically well rendered and visually stunning. But like I gotta think that's also what was meant to be a direct callback because I'm sure people
For
were
sure.
thinking, like, people were gonna have the same reaction you just had, like, oh no, not again. You know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
you know so a little light trolling perhaps from the creative team here, but still, if light trolling leads to some visually stunning panels, I mean, so be it.
I
um,
actually want to talk about that really quickly because there
sure.
has been an emphasis in this comic, specifically around the gang war, with like what can pierce what. We had the bullets from shotgun that pierced Tombstone's hide when he's like formerly been bulletproof. And I don't know that we've necessarily gotten the answer to that. Like, I guess the implication is that Madame Mask gave him some kind of like armor piercing rounds, there. And
Right.
then we've got obviously a nod to Wolverine, like, hey, I was on Krakoa and I borrowed some adamantium from the Wolverine regen cells that they have there. For those of you who are reading the various X-Men books where they establish how they clone Wolverine and re-inject him with adamantium every time. Good times for him. But so she's got this adamantium like tipped blade, which I thought was a really cool image of like the blade cutting into She-Hulk's arm.
Yeah.
Just even the littlest bit. And her kind of not being bothered by it, but also kind of taken by surprise. But then we get like that Janice's armor is bulletproof in some way. And I thought that was just kind of an odd note to like emphasize, like, oh, this is a bulletproof suit. You're going to need stronger bullets to get through it. Is that a setup for something to pierce that? Like, to me, playing with these ideas of what pierces what and setting them up early, like, it seems a little out of its way. Maybe I'm jumping ahead in the story, but like, I couldn't help but notice that.
Oh, sure. This is a Chekhovian gun if I've ever seen it. No
Yeah.
pun intended. So let's talk about where that Chekhovian gun might ultimately fire, perhaps. So let's talk the Lincolns, Dan, because I think that is the 800-pound gorilla, or maybe it's the 800-pound mafiosa in the room,
The
which is like,
albino
yeah,
mafioso.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
'Cause, like, what is going to happen to? And I know I always call her Janice. Is it Janice? Is that been verified
I
by
don't know.
people
It's
more official than us?
tomato,
Or I don't.
tomato.
Okay, whatever. Well, hopefully it's not like what's the other character I used to mispronounce all the time?
Oh, San Johnny.
Sanjani. I'm still gonna get hate mail for that, just for bringing it up. But look, like we talked earlier about the generational themes of this storyline, and like I know that we are getting. Well, let's start at the beginning here, Dan. The whole gang war kicked off because of an attempted assassination on Tombstone, but then they have been simmering and teasing that the Fists are going to get their revenge by targeting Janice before it's all said and done with this story, which kind of puts her in doubt. But like I got to tell you, I'm reading this comic and this current issue, and I am just getting this feeling of foreboding about Lonnie Lincoln here. I really do not believe he makes it to the end of this storyline.
It does read like Lonnie's last stand.
Yeah.
Like this does feel like Lonnie is doing whatever he can to save his daughter, and because he's more sympathetic than Fisk, it's always it's the guy you care about that gets the axe.
Right.
And you're right. I also have a great feeling of foreboding around Lonnie Lincoln. But to that point, let's talk about like what happened in this issue, right? Spider-Man has entrusted, some level of trust with Lonnie to the point that, like, I mean, go to compare it with the original Gang War story, which we're talking about in season 6, episode 10. That Spider-Man, meeting with the Kingpin, whether it's Back in Black or whatever, he is not a guy to stand on the sidelines without like jumping in and just like letting Kingpin have it, especially in this current state. And so to stand there in that opening spread, and look at Kingpin and let Lonnie step forward and do some negotiating is a lot of trust from Spider-Man. And Lonnie has sold himself on like, hey, I know the ins and outs of this thing. Like, I'm picking and choosing my battles,
Yeah.
And what we see here does not appear on the surface to be a guy that is picking and choosing his battles. He seems very easily enraged, and what was a meeting set up to be a meeting with Fisk becomes a, brawl with Fisk. Do you think there is more calculation going on than we are like being like fed because of our limited perspective into Tombstone's mind? Like, is he more in control than, is being suggested here? I mean, we get the teeth breaking, right? That is like unleashing, or what we're meant to understand is the unleashing of the more feral Tombstone by the language of this comic. Has that cap been broken, or is he still playing chess while we're playing checkers?
I honestly don't know. I mean, at the same time, just to kind of go back to the original thesis of this segment here. I mean, like, certainly the breadcrumbs about Lonnie Lincoln and kind of how he has evolved to, I think, how we as readers should now be seeing him as somewhat sympathetic. These breadcrumbs they've been getting dropped since the very beginning of this creative run. I mean, like,
Yeah.
we that very first arc, which, I mean, I still think it's the best arc of this run so far, was the
Agreed.
first 5
Yeah.
issues. Like, yes, like Lonnie manipulates Peter, but there's, kind of like this tip of the hat to it at the end of it, like, you got me, buddy, and he gets him, but like, not, like Lonnie kind of like gets elevated there to like, okay, there's more to this guy than just being a crime boss. And obviously, like, through the build up, and the prelude to Gang War and everything. So, like, and he makes that offhand comment in the last issue, like, I haven't been doing myself any favors on the street by being aligned with you either, buddy. You know what I mean? Like, so, like,
Yeah.
we're building that range of sympathy. Does that mean that Lonnie is in control here?
I mean,
I don't know.
Janice is probably his Achilles heel, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think you could very easily read his daughter is like, and his care for his daughter being a weakness, like,
For sure.
but we don't know yet. Like, he might be more on top of being a father than we have known to this point.
Right, right. But then, at the same time, which kind of leads to the feelings of foreboding, wouldn't the tragedy come? Wouldn't the tragedy be in Lonnie losing control and becoming sloppy as a result? You know what I mean? And ending, in his bid to protect his daughter, fails to protect himself, and he ends up not surviving this storyline when things were looking earlier on like he was was a steady hand on the ship, if you will. Again, I think this is all hyper intentional. We need the remaining issues to answer these questions, of course. But I am of the mindset right now that he has lost control, and I think that's going to be his undoing. But by whose hand? That let's see what kind of story Zeb is weaving here, because I think there's a couple of directions that it can go for sure. I don't think it's going to be the obvious, oh, Kingpin rips his face off. Like, I think it's going to be a little more intricate than that.
Yeah, I don't know, like, if I 100% at this point believe that, like, Kingpin threatening his daughter was enough to, like, make him lose control, especially when the previous issue he pulled White Rabbit aside and said, keep an eye on Janice and keep her safe, So, like, he has every expectation. I guess maybe Fisk's troops, he knows truly that they're going to be able to overpower them. Although right. I don't really know how. I guess she gets the drop on the Rose or whatever. So let's get to talking about Fisk's troops, because there are these, like, red hooded characters that show up at the end, and, like, look, I'm no X-Men Claremont run expert. I notably haven't read that run in its entirety, and I've been reading a lot of modern X-Men, and that's probably my own folly. I just know that Claremont's X-Men is an endeavor that needs to get a significant amount of attention.
It's a lot of content in that run, sir. So yeah. I've read some of it, but not all of it.
I know enough about the Hellfire Gala to, like, recognize, not the Hellfire Club, to recognize their goons, the ones that are up with Fisk and all of that. And I know that he is now running the club as the White King or whatever they're calling him. But I've never seen characters that look like this. And then, sometimes when I'm not clear on a plot detail or an appearance of a character or something like that, I'll go to, like, the Marvel fandom wiki, which I think does an excellent job of, like, cataloging appearances of things. And it's very up to date and has recaps very quickly of, like, things that are up. Now, at this time, there's no recap for this particular issue. And I don't know how that page is sourced. I imagine it's like any other wiki. There are people that contribute stuff to it in some way, and it's not actually, like, double checked by Marvel in any way. Correct me if I'm wrong, or if you know anything more about it than I do. And listeners, if you know, I'd be curious to hear more about the background of that page. But they have those characters listed as people wearing Mandroid armor from the Avengers comics. And they're, like, a constant foe throughout the history of the Avengers and other places in the Marvel Universe. And that's not what I read it as. No. I just read it as, like, random hooded figures whose faces we don't see. Yeah. What did you read it as when you... Because it's one panel. Like these are the backups, or what we are led to believe are the backups from Fisk have arrived.
I mean, it's very startling. Like, my initial read, like, was, oh, these must be more Kingpin people. But I don't want to say quickly, but I don't necessarily buy that, because it's just kind of like, again, like, Rose and Digger are squaring off against Janice and the Syndicate, and like, it's like Janice gets the upper hand against the Rose, and then all of a sudden, just these random hooded characters that we've never seen before just, like, show up and say, light them up, but, like, we don't like who, like, we're not seeing where the gunfire is directed. We're not, like it's breaking all the rules of comics here in terms of, like, what is happening and who is hurt and what is the outcome. Like, it's like, it's very clearly a bait and switch. I think even in terms of what is happening on the we're led to believe, because of Kingpin's face, like, it's over. that, oh, Janice is dead. No, like that's
There's
clearly
no body.
that's nonsense. But like like we've we've played with this before, and I know maybe some of it is due to me misreading the comic, but like I think over the course of the story we've had several instances where like Zeb and JRJR or whoever the artist is kind of playing with like we have panels happening, but like what's actually happening sequentially in each like who's understanding what. Um, there's just so much misdirection just based on the visuals in this storyline so far. So like I don't have an educated guess about who these characters are, but like I my sense is that there is going to be significant explanation about what this all is in a coming issue, because it doesn't quite add up to me that this is just either the Hellfire Club or what, like it just doesn't pass the sniff test for me.
I mean, say what you will about this run, like people who like or dislike the run, Zeb pays real close attention to detail. Like maybe you don't like the choices he's made, but when he makes a choice, he pays great attention to detail. He seeds stuff and it pays off. And he doesn't even draw attention to it sometimes. Like for example, Silvermane's femur being the thing that's used to beat up Hammerhead. Like it doesn't need to underline it. It's there for you to discover, right? So like he could have very easily just told John Romita Jr. to draw the same Hellfire, thugs that we're watching, show up in the big brawl up in, the high-rise building or wherever they are, with Kingpin. So, but that it's not those guys says to me that there's something to read into it not being those guys. Now, if the next issue comes and it's Kingpin's guys, fine. Like, I don't think that's any, like, problem with the storytelling in any way. Like, we all know that there's, like, thugs and then there's, like, super thugs, like upgraded thugs. Yeah.
Right. The version 2 thugs. Unless it's different thug, like unless he draws like other thugs that weren't there the first time, or like Peter's hoodie being a different color or something. I wouldn't be concerned about it.
yeah. So like to me, like this is still a question mark, and I think anybody that thinks Janice is dead by the end of this comic, like I've got a bridge to sell you. In the same way I've got bridges to sell you about the death of Peter Parker and Captain America being Hydra. I don't think it's on that level, but like, we've seen this before in comics. The real twist would be if she was actually dead.
Right.
So,
like, wow, you got me.
Absolutely. I did want to point out one more thing before we kind of end the conversation on the Lincolns is you mentioned this thing about her, Janice cosplaying as like a gangster, and I love the line in this where she makes like a challenge to the Rose and says like, I don't dress like this to get scared. And to me, when you have to point that out, that you're wearing a costume to scare, like you're terrified, right? Like, and it shows by how heavily fortified maybe the armor on that costume is. Like to me, this underlined your point about her cosplaying as a crook or as a villain.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Mark's right. I'll take it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So Mark, what are you going to give this particular issue if you said all your pieces?
I am. My pieces have been said. I'm going to give this a B. I enjoyed this a lot. But kind of going back to the original thing we talked about, I just want more Peter. I think as a comic book, it's better than a B, but as a Spider-Man comic book, it's a B.
I'm giving it a B minus, and for the exact same reasons you said, which is like, I think this is a great comic story, but I'm yet to be convinced by other than First Strike, I've yet to be convinced and the First Strike and the ongoing themes that this is a Spider-Man story, and I need that framing to kick in.
Excellent. All right. We did it.
We did.
All right. Well, that means it's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same week the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. So a thank you to everyone who already supports us in the work that we do. Plus, we wanted to extend a special thanks to our newest contributors, Mark Taylor and Jake Elliott. Mark and I really want to increase all of the awesome work that we do in 2024. So if you're already a patron or want to become one, please help us meet our various goals and make this a better podcast by considering supporting our shows. Just go to amazingspidertalk.com and click on the big Patreon button to get us started.
To download our earliest episodes, you no longer need to go check out our Back Issues podcast because we found a way to extend our main feed to include all of our shows. So as of this episode, the Back Issues podcast no longer exists. Just go to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and get all of the Spider-Man content, Dan.
I will say there are 2 episodes on Spotify that are missing in our earlier Superior days. I believe it's like episode 6 and episode 15. And that's because we used to include music choices from Mark in the episode that we didn't have rights to. And iTunes doesn't care about that, but Spotify does. So if you're someone that is listening on Spotify and you get to this episode and you're enraged, there's like one person out there listening to this that wants to hear those 2 good episodes of Superior Spider Talk. They're everywhere but Spotify. So just a special note, and I'll never bring that up ever again.
Just blame Mark. Blame Mark.
That's it. I'll blame Mark. Don't forget to go check out our Amazing Spider Talk Substack. That's amazingspider.substack.com, where we're covering all of the various B titles in Gang War and all of the other events going on in the world of Spidey. And as we said earlier, we did a recap of all of 2023 at the time of this recording. So, Mark, until we bash heads enough and prove our manliness enough through violence that we appear to be making out, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.